The paradox of desires in Buddhism, unveiling the truth. There's a passage in the Canon where a young monk is being asked by a king why he ordained. After all, the young monk came from a wealthy family. His health was good. His relatives were all alive. Why would he ordain? The monk replied that one of the reasons was that he saw all the world as a slave to craving, and he wanted to get out of that slavery. He gave an example to the king. Suppose someone were to come and say, "There's a kingdom to the east with lots of wealth, lots of people, but a very weak army. Your army is strong enough to beat their army and seize that kingdom. Would you take it?" And here the king is 80 years old, and yet he says, yes. Suppose another person would come from the south, the same message. Another person from the west, another from the north. Another person from across the ocean saying, there was a kingdom across the ocean that you could conquer. Lots of wealth, lots of people. Would you go for it? The king says, yes. The young monk says, that's what I mean when I say the world is a slave to craving. Chapter 1. The desire to be free from desire. There's another passage where the Buddha said that even if it rained gold coins, we wouldn't have enough to satisfy one person's sensual desires. The monk wanted to get out of that slavery to insatiable desires. Now, there are two ways of attempting that. One is just to deny desire, to tell yourself, I don't want anything. But that wasn't the Buddha's way. His way was to find a happiness so total that it satisfied all possible desires, something outside of space and time, so that it couldn't be touched by changes in space and time. That would solve the problem of desire. But to get there requires desire. All phenomena, the Buddha said, are rooted in desire. This means all things good, all things bad, everything except nibbana is rooted in desire. Everything you experience is shaped by your desires. The mind is not a passive thing. It's active. It goes out looking for things, looking for food, looking for clothing, shelter, looking for happiness. What we're doing as we practice is to take that tendency and direct it in a good direction. There's a passage where a Brahmin has come to see Ven, Ananda, who was one of the Buddha's disciples, and asks, "This path that you follow, what are its goals?" Ananda says, "One of the goals is to free the mind from desire." And then the Brahmin asks, "How do you do that?" Ananda says, "One of the ways of doing it is to develop concentration based on desire and the development of right effort." And the Brahmin says, "How can you use desire to get rid of desire? It would be an endless path." So Ananda gives him an analogy. He says, "You came here to visit me in the park. Before you came here, did you have the desire to come here?" "Yes." "And when you came here, what motivated you? Was it desire?" "Yes." "Now that you're here at the park, where is the desire?" "The desire's been satisfied, so it's gone." "That," Ananda said, "is how you should understand this." To explain the path, the Buddha gives an image of a raft to take you across a river. Tie together twigs, leaves, and branches, and then paddle your way across. The paddling is your effort, and you have to hold on to the raft. But notice, that raft is made out of twigs and leaves and branches found on this side of the river. The Buddha didn't give the image of a nibbana yacht coming over and ferrying you across the river. You take things that you already have in your mind, you put them together in the right way, and they can help you get across. Then, when you get to the other side, you don't need them anymore. Now, among those twigs and leaves and branches is the desire that motivates right effort. You notice that some of your thoughts, some of the qualities of your mind lead to happiness. You want to develop them. If they're not there, you want to give rise to them. If you've already got them, then you want to develop them even further. As for unskillful qualities based on greed, aversion, and delusion, you see that if you follow them, they take you in a direction you don't want to go. So if they're there, you want to abandon them. If they're not there, you want to prevent them from arising. Chapter 2. 3 qualities: right mindfulness, alertness, right effort. So, desire is an important part of the path, and this faculty of right effort, which includes skillful desire, underlies right mindfulness, like we're practicing right now, trying to get the mind into concentration by being very mindful of the breath in and of itself. You have to want to focus on the breath and to put aside any thoughts that would pull you away. The Buddha recommends 3 qualities to help with this. One is mindfulness, the ability to keep something in mind. Then there's alertness, the ability to know what you're doing while you're doing it. And then ardency. Ardency is basically right effort again. Part of right effort, of course, is desire. These 3 qualities work together so that you remember when something comes up that would pull you away from the breath, you have to want to come back. You remember to come back, and you remember whatever techniques have worked. Sometimes when you've wandered away, all you have to do is notice the fact that you've wandered away, and you come back. Other times, you have to remind yourself of the drawbacks of the thinking that would pull you away. At the very least, this is not the time for that kind of thinking. Or with heavier cases involving greed, aversion, or delusion, you want to see that any amount of time spent involved in that kind of thinking is going to be a waste. Or you may decide that you simply don't want to pay attention to that thinking. This is where perceiving the mind as a committee is useful. Some committee members may have their opinions, but you don't have to listen to everybody on the committee. You don't have to identify with everyone on the committee. If they're going to chatter about what they want, that's their business. You're going to stay focused on the breath. The thinking of the mind doesn't destroy the breath. It's still here. All you have to do is remember to stay focused here. You begin to notice, when you're really sensitive to the breath energy in the body, that when a thought comes into the mind, there will be a little pattern of tension associated with that thought someplace in the body. It might be in the arms, in the feet, in the forehead, around the eyes. It can be anywhere. If you sense that, as soon as a thought comes in, there's a pattern of tension someplace in the body, you relax it. Breathe right through it. The thought will go away. If it comes back, just make up your mind that you're not going to let that thought come into the mind. This is where having a meditation word is useful, such as Buddho, which means awake. Just repeat that word again and again, rapid fire. It's like jamming the signals. This, of all the methods for keeping the mind from wandering off, requires the most desire, the strongest determination, and the least discernment. But if you think of these different methods as tools in your toolbox, this is the sledgehammer. Sometimes you need a sledgehammer when the finer tools are no match for the job. The important point is that you're ardent in doing this. You give it your whole heart. You realize that instead of being a slave to your desires, you want to take some control. You want your discernment, your wisdom to be in charge of what you want. Because what you want is going to shape everything you experience. If you direct your wants in the right direction, they can take you to a place where the wants are satisfied. When the Buddha talks about nibbana, he describes it as the highest happiness, peace, freedom, a consciousness without any limitations at all, something that's true and unchanging, something totally free from hunger, free from lack. So, the Buddha's not trying to have you deny desire. He's basically saying that it is possible to put your desires in order, straighten them out, tie them together, and make them into a raft that takes you over the flood of desire to the far shore. Once you get there, then you can put the raft aside. But while you're crossing over the river, don't let go. Try to identify which desires in your mind are the most trustworthy ones, the ones that open the most possibility for a genuine happiness. Don't let other desires push them aside. Make sure they're front and center, and this way you give the Buddha's teachings a chance. As he said, he can't show nibbana to anybody. All he can do is describe it as a possibility, as a desirable possibility, and he points out the path leading to that possibility. Then he leaves it up to each of us to prove whether or not he's right. So cultivate the desire to find out if he's right. Through your meditation, through your practice of virtue, concentration, and discernment, try to make yourself worthy of judging to see if what the Buddha said is really true. That kind of desire can be used to put an end to desire, to free you from this slavery to craving that otherwise drives the world and keeps us under its thumb. Chapter 3. Craving and Desire on the Path. There's a paradox in the Buddha's teachings, where on the one hand he says that admirable friendship is the whole of the holy life, the entirety of the practice. On the other hand, he says he's simply one who points out the way. It's up to us to follow the way. The sense in which admirable friendship is the whole doesn't mean that it takes care of everything, just that it's a necessary prerequisite. As the Buddha said, without him, where would we be? We wouldn't know anything about the path. We wouldn't even know that there was such a path. You read all of the strange beliefs that were held in his time, and if it weren't for the Buddha, those would be still around, and many strange beliefs still are around. But the path is available still. The fact that it's been made available by the Buddha and all the other admirable friends between the Buddha and us, that's what makes it possible for us to practice. So we should have a sense of gratitude for them. But at the same time, we have to realize they can't do the work for us. After all, suffering is an inside job. It's something that we're doing to ourselves, and the end of suffering is going to require a skill so that we can stop doing the suffering. In the Buddha's analysis, the causes leading up to suffering all come from ignorance, avijja. The opposite of ignorance, vijja, has two meanings in Pali. One, it means knowledge, and two, it means skill. That second meaning is really important because the Four Noble Truths have duties appropriate to each. Suffering is to be comprehended, its cause is to be abandoned, its cessation is to be realized, and the path to its cessation has to be developed. Each of those duties is going to involve skill. Nobody else can make us skillful. They can point out the way, as the Buddha did. They can show us how things are done, but they can't take their skill and put it in our hands or in our hearts. That's something we have to do, and we have to cultivate the desire to do that. That's why, in right effort, the phrase, generating desire, is so important. All things, the Buddha said, are rooted in desire. Suffering is rooted in desire, but the path is also rooted in desire. So desire is not a bad thing. It's simply a question of knowing which kind of desires to encourage and which ones not to encourage. And the desire for awakening also is not a bad thing. All too often you hear people say that the desire for awakening is the one thing that gets in the way of our awakening and seeing our true awakened nature, which ties you in a knot. You want awakening, but you're not supposed to want it. You'd think that you would benefit from it, but then there's not supposed to be any you. That kind of thinking, as I said, gets you all tied up. The Buddha was very frank. You need desire in order to develop the path, in order to get to the end of desire. That's why desire is not only part of right effort, but it's also the first of the bases of success. There's a passage where Venananda makes this really clear. A Brahmin comes to see him and asks, "What does this path that you're practicing lead to?" And Ananda says, "One of the things it leads to is the end of desire." And what is this path of practice? Ananda lists the four bases for success, starting with desire. The Brahmin says, Wait a minute, you can't end desire with desire. But then Ananda gives an analogy to show that you can. He asks the Brahmin, "Before you came to this park where I'm staying, did you have the desire to come?" "Yes, that's why you came. But now that you're here, where's that desire?" "Well, it's gone. I don't need it anymore." In the same way, you pick up the desire to follow the path, and it will take you to a point where you don't need it anymore. Think of the image of the raft, or the image of the relay chariots. They take you to where you want to go, and then you put them aside. Chapter 4. I want to be awakened. Ananda also has a passage where he talks about craving as being part of the motivating energy for the path. As he says, this body comes into existence through craving. You're going to be putting an end to craving, but to get there, you have to use craving. In this case, he expresses it as, you see that other people have gained awakening, and you have the desire within yourself, I too would like to have awakening. That's craving for becoming. I want to be awakened. Here again, we're often told that that thought will skew your practice. You're starting with wrong view, that there's a you who will benefit somehow. But again, Ananda doesn't talk in those ways. He's very frank. You need to have that kind of craving. The desire to be awakened is a legitimate desire to develop. Of course, you develop skillfully. You ask yourself, what are the causes? Well, there's the path, so you focus on developing the path. You don't just sit there hoping to realize the cessation without the path, or think that you can somehow clone awakening without going through the path. The path is a series of strategies. It borrows elements of the first and the second noble truth. This is paradoxical, because all too often we're told that the path and the goal are the same thing. In other words, you get to the third noble truth by doing the third noble truth, or that somehow the fourth noble truth is the third noble truth. But that's not the case at all. The fourth noble truth borrows elements from the first. We cling to the aggregates, and you use the aggregates on the path. You focus on the breath, developing a feeling of ease using a perception of the breath to hold you in place. You fabricate the processes of directed thought and evaluation to settle in, and you're aware of all these things. Well, that's the 5 aggregates right there, creating right concentration. Then there are 4 forms of clinging around the aggregates. One of them you don't use, which is clinging to sensuality. But then there's clinging to habits and practices, clinging to views, clinging to doctrines of the self. So you hold on to the precepts. That's a good set of habits to have. You hold on to the practice of concentration, which is a good practice to have. You hold on to right view. You hold on to your sense of yourself as being someone who's competent to do this and who will benefit from doing it. That covers 3 kinds of clinging. As for what the path borrows from the second noble truth, out of the 3 kinds of craving, again you drop craving for sensuality, but the other 2 are useful. You want to put an end to the you who is suffering, the asterisk you asterisk who is creating suffering, the you who wants to keep on traveling through samsara. Asterisk, that would count as craving for non-becoming. As craving for becoming, you want to become awakened. Okay, you use that desire as a motive force for the practice. As you get closer and closer to the goal, you begin to realize you don't need that anymore. That's when you can let it go. So instead of equating the 4th noble truth to the 3rd, we actually borrow elements of the 1st and the 2nd in the 4th noble truth. The 3rd noble truth, though, is something totally other. The path requires passion, but the 3rd noble truth is total dispassion. You start out developing dispassion for the 1st and 2nd noble truths. And then, after developing passion for the 4th, you turn around and develop dispassion for that. That's how you get to the 3rd. So we make use of what we've got. Think again of that image of the raft going across the river. What's the raft made of? It's not made of the other side, where you're trying to go. It's made out of twigs and branches on this side, the side where you already are. It's kind of makeshift, but you do your best to tie it together well. In other words, you make use of what you've got, and that will include desire, that will include craving. Learn how to foster the skillful forms of desire, the skillful forms of craving, and that'll help get you across. So it's your own desire that's going to get you across, as your desire motivates you to learn to become more and more skillful. You think about what the Buddha taught about cause and effect, path and goal, so you focus your desires in the right place. So, on the one hand, the holy life is totally dependent on the Buddha. On the other hand, it's rooted in your own desire like every other Dhamma. This may sound paradoxical, but as you get a sense of the path, you see that it all makes sense. And the Buddha was wise in the way that Ajahn Lee would define wisdom, the sort of wisdom that can take almost anything and get good use out of it. The Buddha had no use for sensual craving, no use for sensual clinging, but the other forms of craving and clinging he found a use for. It's up to us to figure out how to use those things in a skillful way. So, we get inspiration from the Buddha, and that's the sense in which the entirety of the path depends on him. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't have any idea that there was a path. But we also have to depend on ourselves. It's simply a matter of learning how to identify which things within ourselves will be helpful on the path. And don't be surprised to find desire and craving among those things. Chapter 5. The Truth of Desires. One of the reasons we try to get the mind in concentration is because it allows us to see the intentions that don't want to be in concentration. If we don't set up this intention that we're going to stay here with a breath, one intention, one thought, one perception flows into another and another and another. The boundaries get very vague. Our intentions can hide other intentions very easily. But once you've made up your mind you want to stay right here, then anything else that doesn't fit in with right here has to be thrown out. Sometimes it's discouraging, seeing how many other intentions come in and have to be thrown out. But you're learning something important. There are these intentions, what the Buddha calls fabrications, and desires that slosh around in the mind and that we don't know much about. Because we're ignorant of them, they can influence us, skewing our perception of reality or the perceptions that we want to adopt. Things may seem true because they fit in with a particular desire, and if we don't know the desire, we can't be sure about how true those things are. So we're here to learn about our desires. When the Buddha talks about sensory perception, things don't just start with the fact that something comes in and hits the eye. The mind is already primed to look at things in a certain way, based on the way you think, based on the way you perceive things, based on your desires, based on the feelings you have in the body. Scientists have been starting to show how much your intestinal system actually runs your brain. If the intestinal system feels bad, then you're going to see things in a certain way. If it feels good, you're going to see them in another way. And that's just that one system. It's a big one. But all too often, we're unconscious of what's happening. As we meditate, we're here to sort it out. Our desire is to learn about them. See which ones are actually operating when we choose a perception or a way of thinking. That requires a certain amount of stability because there are a lot of desires in the mind that are hidden for good reason. Either we're embarrassed about what they are or else we've realized that they're impossible. But part of the mind still wants to hold on to them anyhow. If you don't have a good solid place in the mind to watch these things, to see them as something separate, then it's hard to admit to them. So you still the mind. You give the mind a good sense of well-being through the way that you breathe, through the way you relate to yourself, so that when these desires come up, you can see them clearly. If you see that something is impossible, you realize it's impossible. You're more likely to realize it's impossible because you're coming from a better place. So the Buddha has us accept not only that we can get the mind into concentration and that it's a good thing to try to get the mind to stay with one thing. He also says to take as a working hypothesis the fact that it is possible to find true happiness, a happiness that doesn't change, a happiness that doesn't cause any harm. Hold that as your standard. If you don't believe that that kind of happiness is possible, you'll tell yourself, I'll content myself with something less. It seems reasonable. Think of all the people who argued with the young Buddha-to-be, telling him that his desire for awakening was impossible. Their arguments are very reasonable. They kept pointing to people in the past, saying this great king or that great sage saw that this was impossible. The Buddha said, then in that case, those people weren't really noble. In the early stage of his quest, he wanted to find if such a thing as the deathless really was possible. He felt that it was worth giving his life to the quest to find out. One of the meanings of his awakening is that, yes, it is possible. Through our own efforts, we can find true happiness. So think of that as a desire for something possible. Then you can use that as your measuring stick for other desires. Notice that the aim is true happiness. It's not arriving at the ultimate truth, although you do arrive at an ultimate truth. But to get there, you have to figure out, what's the ultimate happiness? Whatever is true for the sake of that ultimate happiness, you take that as true. That's another working hypothesis. Anything that tells you that that kind of happiness is not possible, you say, that's false. Then you watch your desires and see what visions of truth they have. Now, you've got a measuring stick. This is an important way of understanding our perceptions of reality, or other ways we think about reality. What desires do they serve? And do we really want to follow those desires? First, you have to know what those desires are. Again, that's why we try to get the mind still and get it to ask the right questions. One good line of questioning is exactly this. What's the desire that underlies that perception or my willingness to take on that perception? This requires a fair amount of patience and a lot of honesty, because these desires are used to operating in the shadows. They're like corrupt government officials. I understand officials have been complaining recently. They say, people don't have any sympathy for us. We're doing a lot of hard work here, making decisions based on information they can't know. And the question is, why can't we know? Why is this all being kept secret? That's how the mind works. It's a crafty politician. Your desires are crafty politicians. And as with any crafty politician, it is possible to find them out, but it takes a lot of patience, a lot of persistence, and a willingness on your part to not identify with everything that comes up in the mind. In other words, just because the desire is there doesn't mean it's one you want to really pursue, if you really look at it. So try to get the mind still so that you can see these things and give it a sense of well-being in that stillness. That way, it's easier to say no to a desire and not get upset about the fact that you have desires that you don't like, or at least you don't like to admit to yourself. Think of the mind as a large group of people. Some of them have had power for a long time. Others are trying to assume power. You're trying to get your desire for true happiness to assume power. The ones who have been operating through the past are not going to give up power easily. But if you have the well-being and the clarity of concentration on your side, you've got an important ally. You've got the wisdom of the Buddha's 4 Noble Truths on your side. That's an important ally too. Chapter 6. Conclusions. Notice that those truths are truths about cause and effect, what's possible and what's not possible, truths about things that are very close to your mind, truths about suffering, what the cause is, and what's the desire behind this suffering. The Buddha lists the possible desires. What are the desires that get you out? There are lists of skillful desires as well. The desire to get rid of unskillful qualities that are there, and not to let them arise if they're not there. The desire to give rise to skillful qualities, and then once they're there, the desire to maintain them. These are truths about desire and the effects of desires. That's something we can observe. Sometimes our perceptions about the world outside are hard to judge as to whether they're really accurate or not and how much reliable information we have. But we can know our desires. We can get a sense of which ones are skillful and which ones are not. When you find yourself adopting a perception or an idea of reality that's based on an unskillful desire, that's enough reason to say no to it. Even though it insists that it's true, you have to be able to say no to it because it's serving the purposes of something unskillful inside. Whereas the perceptions that serve the purpose of what is skillful inside, you can accept those as provisional truths for the time being. As you get to know your desires better, you can begin to ferret out the desires that seem to be skillful but ultimately are not. This is the process we all have to go through as we practice. We can't be impatient and say, I want nothing but true desires and true perceptions right from the beginning. We're feeling our way, but we're feeling our way not blindly and not in total darkness. The more light we can shine into the issue of what in the mind is skillful and what's not, the more we'll be able to choose our perceptions of reality and deal not only with issues in the mind but also issues outside in a way that's more and more trustworthy. We're moving towards something that's ultimately trustworthy. On the path, we're not quite there yet, but we're moving in the right direction. So an important aspect of the practice is to get to know your desires. Put yourself in a position where you can judge them, wisely, fairly, but firmly. And that'll straighten out a lot of other issues in the mind right there.